So it's our final day in Australia. We're all packed up and we're staying at Mum and Dad's. So they're going to take us to the airport. I was, I guess, sitting around thinking about our trip and what kind of motivated us to go and rediscover our Dutch heritage. And my dad has actually written a book himself about his dad, my opa, and his involvement in World War II and his key role in the Dutch resistance. So that's kind of motivated us to see different places in the Netherlands, and I thought I'd take this opportunity to actually chat to Dad and see what he has to say about his book and get a few little inside tips. So I've made him sit down with me and answer many of my burning questions
This is great.
about the book. So I guess the start of the book, in like chronological order, I guess, you kind of set the scene very well. Like it starts at the start of Nazi occupation in Holland. So they first came into Rotterdam, was it?
Well, they invaded all of the Netherlands. There was one wave that went to The Hague.
Yep.
And another came more from the south and hit Rotterdam,
Yeah. Okay.
hoping to go straight through Rotterdam and get all their ground troops through into the seat of government, which was The Hague.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So the centre point was The Hague that they were aiming towards.
That's correct. They were hoping, they thought, possibly arrogantly, that it would take maybe a day or two and they would be in The Hague and the government would give up and they would take over.
Yeah.
But they got clogged.
Clogged.
Dutch pun. In Rotterdam, there were two vital bridges across the River Maas, which runs through the middle of Rotterdam.
Yep.
There was a railway bridge and a traffic bridge.
Yep.
The Germans land on the 10th of May in 1940, very early in the morning. They landed by seaplanes on the river.
Yeah. Okay.
And discharged German soldiers on rubber boats. And they took an island in the river underneath the bridges. They had paratroopers that rained down all over Rotterdam. And they rapidly took over the airfield south of Rotterdam city.
Yep.
But found that there was resistance at the bridges.
Right. Okay. And they didn't expect there to be any resistance? They just planned to blaze right through?
Yep. They figured that they would get to the bridges and get across the bridges before any in the Dutch military forces had a chance to blow them up, because that would have really stymied their approach and their progress into the Netherlands.
Yeah.
But the Dutch military forces were not very experienced.
No, and that comes across. They kind of took ordinary citizens towards the end and just, well, the whole way, and just armed them with what they had and said, well, good luck.
Yeah.
Do your best.
That's very much correct, because they conscripted a lot of men from national service, even going back several years, and everybody that had been conscripted had to come back in.
Yeah.
So no, they weren't very well trained, they weren't very well armed. It just so happened in Rotterdam there was a contingent of Marines, Royal Marines, who were very experienced soldiers.
Very lucky.
Yeah, and they actually were holding the railway station at the Maas River, the Maas railway station, and were managing to hold back the German advance across the bridges.
Right.
There were pockets already in Rotterdam itself of the paratroopers that had landed there. The Germans there were holed up mainly in one of the buildings, which had about 4 stories. So they had an overview of the northern end of the bridges, so they could keep that under fire, which prevented the Dutch from getting to the bridges and blowing them up.
Yeah, exactly.
And the Marines that were in the Maas railway station. Now, my dad, your opa, was a radio signaller.
Yes, yeah, you set that scene quite well and kind of take him and place him in different areas throughout. But yeah, he started out as a radio signaller.
Yeah, he was a radio signaller. So it was strange, but I think thus was the disarray amongst the military hierarchy that they were just clutching at straws. And they said to Dad and a couple of other radio operators, you guys take these ancient rifles and go down to the railway station and defend it. So, which they did.
These poor people that they didn't have a lot of training. They didn't have any training.
Not in fighting. They
No.
had training in Morse code and the like. But here's another silly thing. They had no radio senders or receivers. The military depended on the telephone system for communication.
Yeah, right.
And guess what? The telephone system was out of action.
Great.
So there was no communication. Anyway, Dad was in there with the Marines, a contingency of Marines, and they ended up with no supplies, only ammunition, for 4 days and 4 nights, holding back the Germans, which they did. Until the Germans had enough, and what they did then was, pretty heinous. They sent squadrons of bombers over and pulverised the entire inner city of Rotterdam. They flattened the whole lot.
I think that was the first kind of key point in the book. So it sets the scene really well. You can kind of get into Hank, my opa, as a person and how he was living his life. And then the first kind of
Event.
yeah, thank you.
war,
The
yeah.
first event in the book was that bombing, and it kind of puts you into that mindset while you're reading it. And, oh goodness, okay, this is real.
That's right. And when you see photos of the devastation, especially I've seen in my research a couple of photos of the actual Mars railway station, how it was obliterated. And I describe it in the book how he, when the bombs started falling, he just ran
Yeah.
while the city exploded around him. And I mean, he was singed, he had no eyebrows left, his clothing was burning at one stage. But he got out to the outskirts of Rotterdam, somehow intact.
Yeah, exactly.
The first of, many narrow escapes during the duration of the war.
Absolutely. And yeah, it baffles me to think a lot of the times that reading the book, I almost didn't exist. He escaped death that many times.
Yes.
And it kind of follows him through his many kind of brushes with death and the many different places where he went, and it shows, I guess, the camaraderie of the Dutch people in that time. So you mentioned earlier they all face that moral dilemma of, do we keep our heads down, do we stand up, do we fight? Opa chose to take arms and fight physically, but I guess those other people, they also chose to fight, but in a different way, by housing people that needed shelter. It's a way of fighting back, but...
Absolutely. And, make no mistake, somebody who decides to take in either a Jewish person or a student who were hunted, or a worker who was being hunted to Germany to die in the labour camps, anyone who would harbour any of these people is under pain of death. If they were to be discovered or betrayed by other people, the Germans would not hesitate to shoot them.
No, absolutely
There was no
not.
process. It was hard and fast. That was it. So for that many people to agree to take in their fellow citizens and hide them on pain of death is just miraculous and wonderful.
Yeah, because Opa did. He needed places to hide. He became a wanted man, and I don't want to spoil the book, but...
No, that's right.
Yeah, I don't want to spoil it.
But no, you're right.
He needed those places to hide, so he first of all went to... Where did he go first?
There's a whole story leading up to it, but he ended up in Amsterdam needing to get out because they were showing his photo, the Germans were showing his photo in cinemas, saying wanted. So he had a false identity card, but it still had his photo on it. It had a different name and different background material.
So they could still identify him.
Yeah. So that's the first time, and he had to get out of Amsterdam. Eventually did, and then made his way, and that's a story in itself that is in the book, to the northern province of Friesland. And there he ended up on a farmhouse eventually, living which had a ginormous barn because it was a dairying outfit. So it was a really large barn which was stacked floor to ceiling with hay bales for the wintertime.
Yep.
And inside the hay bales, they had built a room.
That's just incredible that they managed to do that.
Yep. And my dad and two compatriots lived inside that hay bale. There was even a car
Inside the hay bale.
inside the hay bale being hidden. So, and it's a point I make in the book, that by the end of the war, after 5 years of occupation, it was estimated there were more than 300,000 people being hidden all over the Netherlands.
That's incredible.
It is incredible, and all those people did it on pain of death, and did it. It was remarkable.
No, absolutely. And so how long did he stay in the hay bale?
I think he was there nearly 2 years.
Nearly 2 years.
Yeah, there were various other places leading up to that part of Friesland, but that's where he really got involved in the armed resistance, and they carried out armed raids on council chambers, and then also towards the end of the war, the British started sending over weapons and would drop them out of aeroplanes in the middle of the night.
Yeah, I think that's where you say in the book, it was earlier on, but he was given a pistol, and that was his kind of turning point of saying, okay, I'm in this now.
That's right.
There's no turning back.
No
and
turning back.
That pistol eventually turned into weapons drops in the middle of the night. And
yeah, in these massive canisters that took like at least 4 to 6 people to carry, they would be flung out of bombers that were flying in at 100 metres above the land in the pitch black. So they had to dodge 12 or 18 of these canisters thudding to earth.
yeah, dive out of the way.
Yeah, even that was, lethally dangerous. And then they had to carry them from the fields where they were dropped, hide them, unpack them, hide them, and distribute them. It's just astounding what these people got up to.
Yeah, I guess it does show the importance of camaraderie and, I guess, trusting few people and
Yes.
keeping your circle close, I guess, because, if one word gets out, one move differently, it could mean something completely different.
And they were. Many of these areas, groups that were receiving the weapons and carrying out all sorts of activities, many of them did either get betrayed or found out by the Germans and just taken out into a field and shot. That's it. No judiciary or anything like that, no rules of war. That's what they did. And as the Germans were being squeezed north after the Normandy landings, they became even more desperate and vicious in how they treated especially resistance workers.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What I found really interesting was, I guess, how covert the whole resistance operation was.
Oh, absolutely.
Can you touch on, I guess, the different cells in the resistance? And
Yeah.
it was really interesting in the book. There was a lot of code words used, and it was essentially spy tactics when they were using essentially spy tactics, which was really interesting.
Yes, and they kept it to small cells, and there was an overview, and there was a command structure through the resistance. For an example, if any of the separate groups had reason to suggest that maybe somebody needed to be liquidated because they were dangerous for the underground, for the resistance, that had to be run past a type of council of resistance commandants, and had to be okayed. They were organised to that degree.
Yeah.
They were very conscious, and especially in Friesland, they were extremely conscious that the resistance not descend into banditry, because that would jeopardise the support they got from the farmers and the local people, which they depended on.
They needed, absolutely. As we said earlier, they were just as crucial into the success of the resistance itself.
Yeah, absolutely. So they were very keen to operate as carefully and as compassionately as they could without descending. They kept saying it. We must be careful not to descend into banditry, because that did happen, as you'll read about in the book.
Absolutely. We pause?
Yeah, what might I do for a bit?
Yeah.